Welcome to Storytelling with Lindsay Bednar. Hi.
Hi, how are you?
I'm doing great. I'm excited for this flip of roles today.
I am too. I am very excited to hear all about Lindsay Bednar.
Well, and it's funny I need to speak to this because you and I are working on the second recording of when you're going to come on the podcast, and there's there are some technical difficulties. Mercury is just getting out of retrograde. We had several things that were coming up, but you reached out to me and you were like, hey, what about you sharing your story? Because you really haven't shared your journey to publishing on the podcast yet. And as soon as you text me that, I was like, well, yeah. And you're a medium and you channel. And when you get hits, it's like, yep, that's supposed to happen. So I was all in. So great idea. And
Awesome, I love it. So, kind of funny because you and I, when we recorded episode 4, I remember you kind of pushing for, hey, let's, cover some of the work that you're doing. And I was very apprehensive because I was in the middle of a lot of stuff at the time and I wasn't really sure where I was going business wise. And I remember feeling like a strong pull of, but why wouldn't we be talking about the book in your publishing company? Because you're doing all this great stuff. So it makes sense that we're coming out of the gate storytelling, but also intertwining the two of these, right? Because you have this amazing company that you've been working on and been building. And it just seems natural that we would talk about you beyond
well,
the
thanks.
labels and beyond the storytelling and all the things, right?
For sure. I've done it on several other podcasts, but never on this one. So I am excited. Let's get into it.
Thank you. All right. So, who is Lindsay Bednar beyond storytelling with Lindsay Bednar? There's so many different hats that you wear. What are they? And tell us more.
Yeah, it's funny because my girlfriends and I talk about this, and I'm sure we've talked about this ad nauseum, but you get to this age, we're midlife, where you are really starting to think about those labels that you wear and all the different facets of ourselves. And we present ourselves to the world as, a mom, or I'm in this industry, I'm a wife, I'm a whatever. But everybody wears so many different hats and we're so many different things. And it's one of the things I love about just connecting with people is going beyond, all of these exterior labels and things that we have. So, um, I mean, so first of all, I'm a mom of 2 kids and a happy wife to my best friend. Um, I have 2 sisters I am very close with, and my parents. Love, very family oriented. Love all my girlfriends. I have the best friends in the world. Um, Most amazing authors, clients. Like I feel super happy, and it took. I've always been a very happy person, happy with my life, but I've had a winding road to get where I was. And so I don't know, I was in high school, I was never like the straight A student, never your stellar athlete. I was far more into uh, talking on the phone, hanging out with friends. And, when you're in high school and all of the accolades have to do with your accomplishments and the things that you've done, I always felt a little bit like, I don't kind of less than, especially when I had 2 very old, very accomplished older sisters. Um, just like I hadn't found my groove yet, and trying to figure out what I'm going to do for college. And I'd had several conversations with my mom. She's like, well, why don't you go into teaching? You love English. And her major was English teaching as well. And my grandmother was a teacher, graduated high school at like 17, went to college, which was pretty unheard of in her age, very intelligent. Her 2 sisters were also teachers. So it was definitely in my blood. Um, so I went down that path, went to school, did my student teaching in college. And at that time, it's senior year of college. All my friends are living life their senior year. They're going out, they're having a lot of fun. Not that I wasn't participating in that, but I had like, I would go to student teaching all day, I would come home, and then I would have papers to grade and a lot of things to correct and all this onslaught. And I thought, gosh, I don't know if I want to do this forever. This is a lot of work. And so left college with my teaching degree, decided I'm not going to go into teaching right now. It's too much and I don't know if that's the direction I'm going to go. So, I don't know, it's summertime. I think I got a job at like Olive Garden, just kind of trying to figure out my stuff. And then Gary proposed, and well, not right away. This was, I was still kind of figuring things out. Okay, so let me back up. He did not propose that early. Nope, I definitely waited for a while. So but we were living together, and it was kind of like, oh, you need to start adulting. Like, okay, I've graduated college. I need to figure things out. So I got a random job as a administrative assistant, was working that for a while, and it didn't take even a year for me to realize like this isn't my thing. I'm gonna go do teaching. So it was middle of the year when I decided to try to get a teaching job. Well, being pretty green that I am, people aren't hiring for teachers in the middle of the year, obviously. And so I just started substitute teaching. And if anybody who's involved in a school district knows that you have your tried and true substitute teachers. They're usually teachers who have taught in the district, they're retired, they come back and they sub. So the positions that were open to substitute teach on any given day were typically not at those high schools, they were at alternative schools. And I didn't know anything about alternative schools at the time. I knew we had some kids we went to school with, and then all of a sudden they weren't going to our high school and they went to some other school. And I knew it was usually because they got expelled or something happened. And so, anyways, I started substitute teaching at these alternative schools, and the first few days were terrifying. Not only did I feel like I was pretty close to their age, but I just felt like uh, there wasn't a lot of classroom management. Granted, I was substitute teaching, so they don't really have a rapport with me yet. But I thought, oh, this is not what I want to do. But little by little, I just kept taking the job for whatever reason, probably because they were the only ones that would come up. And I started falling in love with these kids. Like I would have really great conversations with them um, in between classes or, whenever there was downtime. And they just really loved connecting, like loved, wanted to know about me, wanted to tell me about their life and their struggles and things they were going through. And I fell in love with that part. And so by the end of the year, a position opened up. I applied for it. I got hired because I had been with this school for, most of the year substitute teaching. And for the next 12 years, I went from school to school and taught uh, English in alternative schools and really enjoyed that time. There was so many things that was necessary in my journey that happened during that teaching experience that if I hadn't had that, I wouldn't be where I am now. So that's where I started. Um, I absolutely loved working with kids on their memoirs. So I was teaching ninth through 12th graders, and I even had some honors courses that I taught. Sometimes it was within a high school, so I'd have honors classes, and then I'd have classes for students who struggled with English. Um, and I loved the memoir project because kids just got to open up and tell me about their life stories. And that was my favorite part. And I was always floored by how resilient and amazing these kids were. I mean, the stuff that they had experienced at their tender age of, teenager, I was like, what? How are you? How are you even like coming to school with a good attitude and doing your work? I would be on dire straits. So, um, that kind of started to spark a little something. And writing, I always knew that I loved writing and that was my niche, but that was a little like flicker. 2016,
Did,
I got
do you
a,
mind if I stop you?
yeah, go ahead. Yes.
Sorry. So once you learned more about them from their memoir, the personal perspective, did the reasons as to why they were in the alternative school system start to make more sense?
Ooh, I love this question. A million percent. And I would say that I knew them already on a pretty good level, that a lot of that had been clear to me by that point. But there's no question you can't work with any particular person or learn somebody's story and then not have just total empathy and a new lens as to why they operate in the way that they did. So, absolutely, I started to see, like, okay, so if this is your perspective and this is your lens, and every time you have an interaction with a police officer, it's a negative one, it involves fear, it involves, potentially mom and dad are going away, or there's going to be separation of the family, you're going to come out of that with a very different perspective of a police officer than I would have. And so there were so
Hmm.
many aha moments in working in that environment that I, I don't think you can fully appreciate unless you're immersed in it and you really see these kids' heart and souls and the experiences they went through. So, for sure. Great
Yeah, what
question.
the role that trauma plays, right? Did you
Yeah,
feel like a lot of them were, probably more sensitive souls, like their intuition was probably more kicked up, or they were picking up on more maybe than they realized as well, and maybe we're struggling with like the sensory component of being in a public large school system?
for sure. The older I get, the more I realize that, I've always thought of it as such a strength that people have where they can kind of just disconnect from other people's opinions and feelings. And there's no questions it's a strength because it can keep you out of a lot of drama and situations you don't need, and you can be more authentically you without worrying about how it lands. But there's something so beautiful about a soul that's so highly affected by things around them, and the way that people operate. And no question, this was, I always say that my students were like M&Ms. They had this hard outer shell and then this like kind of ooey gooey center. Um, and that's what they were. And you'd get to know them. And it was like, oh, yeah. Well, why are you presenting yourself in this way? Because
Sure.
this is so good, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, that makes sense. And you obviously fostered that, through your connection with them. And to be able to tell their story, I'm sure was a big release for a lot of them to just, how many people have heard their own story, right?
yeah.
Or been able to write it or share it. So just that in and of itself, I have no doubt was profound and powerful for them.
It
Yeah,
was. And, as you know, I have one of my previous students became a client of mine last year, and we released her memoir. And it is an incredibly powerful story. And I knew it at the time when she was a student that she had a powerful story, but I didn't know the extent to the information because honestly, it was like under legal protection. Like there were things she couldn't share. Um,
sure.
and so having that come full circle and taking a student to a client and then watching how she has fully moved beyond her adversity and made such a beautiful life for herself is like, it's also shaped so much of what I know humans are capable of, and why I love to share stories of people overcoming that. Because, I'm a huge believer, and you can either use your past to make you bitter or you can use it to make you better. And when I have seen people come from really traumatic situations and then have these beautiful lives that they've cultivated for themselves, I know it's possible. And so I just don't like
Hmm.
the idea that we have to have this rinse repeat cycle of, well, I was born into trauma and so I'm going to repeat it. And it's like, no, there are a lot of ways to get out. And I love bringing forward those modalities forward to help people.
Make your mess your message, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah,
for
and I
sure.
think, you
Okay,
know,
awesome.
you're living proof of that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not easy, but it is liberating in its own ways for sure. Sorry, I kind of derailed you there. So
No.
back to 2016.
No, that was also good and so important. So I was teaching, and this was when I was in Princeton, and I really loved my teaching staff there, loved my students. I don't think there would have been any reason for me to leave other than the commute was 45 minutes there, 45 minutes home. So at some point, that alone might have got to be too much, but I was very happy there. And so um, it was on my lunch break, and I was reading through some emails, and I got an email from the Ellen DeGeneres show, which I used to watch all the time. And it was this contest where if you could articulate what home means to you, you have a chance to win $25,000 from Chip and Joanna, the Magnolia couple, you know?
Sure. Yeah.
And I was like, oh, I can do that. You know, like I'm a writer. I can talk about what home means to me. And at the time I had um, well, I think there were one and three, Whitney and Garrison. Um, and they were little. And when I thought about home, it was like, I just felt my heart calling to it. Like, well, home is what happens when you take a house and you put a, this family organism, these little people, and this, you breathe life into it. And that's what just I felt. So I wrote it within like 15 minutes, and it just came out as rhyme scheme, absolutely channeled. Um, by the end of it, that was the first draft of my first children's book, Home. And I knew it was one of those moments where I knew, like, oh my God, like this is good. And this just came like, just like a download. And I drove home that day, and I normally I always listen to podcasts. I think I was in the midst of Serial. That was the first podcast I ever listened to. The Adnan and Syed case. So good. Um, but I drove home with the radio off, and I felt so excited because I just knew that was a pivotal moment and my life was going to go in a different direction. I didn't know what it looked like yet. I didn't know whatever, but everything in me was excited. And I got home and I talked to Gary about it and whatever. And um, yeah, I started taking the steps to make that into a book. I didn't win the contest, by the way, but you know, their loss. So I,
Yeah. 100%. And it got you where you needed to go, right? It was
yeah,
the necessary stepping stone.
yeah. And
Yeah.
so it just, I knew that it was going to be a book. It was going to be a children's book. And um, I knew I needed to bring it forward. So I started going down the rabbit hole of how do you bring a children's book forward. And, you know, I remember talking to my mom, and she had some like printed thing from a long time ago of how do you bring a book forward. And I'd go online, and there were all these opinions and all these different pathways. And I ended up getting connected to a friend of a friend out in Colorado who worked with consultants who really taught you how to bring a book forward, and then essentially to be self-published. And so in working with
Had
them,
you ever considered writing a book prior to this? Like at any point in your life, had you thought, I could see me being an author? I could see me writing children's book. Was this prior to this like channeled moment, which I can totally relate to? Did you have kind of preconceived notions that this might be a path for you at some point?
yes, I mean, from a kid, I was always writing stories. There's a picture of me at my grandma and grandpa's house, my grandpa Rodney, who the company's named after, and I'm writing a children's story, and I remember it was about like break. It was called like The Little White Lie or something. It was about like breaking a vase and trying to cover it up, and this girl, like, I don't know. I remember. I also had written a manuscript several years prior to that that was a little bit very much autobiographical. Um, and it's thick. I mean, it was close to being done. But then I didn't do anything with it. And I still haven't because I've evolved so much since. And so I don't know, at some point I might go back to it, but it just hadn't been the time to revisit it. It was very
Doesn't
much
fit
like,
anymore.
yeah, yep. But yes, writing's always been my love. I wrote I won like a writing contest in high school. I was always in honors English. I always excelled in it and always knew that writing was going to be something I was going to do. Um, but you get on a path and you start going down it and you kind of forget about all these aspirations and things that you wanted to do until you have a divine intervention of some email that like yeah opens the floodgates. So that's
I know all
crazy.
about that for sure. And just the switch from the teaching role, because obviously you were an English teacher, right? So I mean, of
Yep.
course, you excelled in it, you liked it, you enjoyed it, but the role from the primary focus being on teaching versus being the actual writer and, editor, publisher. So you
Right.
write the book and then you continue
Yeah.
writing, or what transpires from there?
Yeah. Well, and I'll back up a little bit because I did attempt to go the traditional publishing route for a bit. And so um, I think it was over really that first part of summer, that end of spring, first part of summer, where I was sending out query letters to literary agents that represented traditional publishing companies. And so you had to really research these companies, who represented them, what kind of books they were taking on. And even if they were, say, taking on a children's book, what I found out very quickly is that there were certain types of children's books they were taking on or certain type of themes that they were looking for. So uh, when I would hear back from them, they would have great feedback. We really liked your writing. Right now, these are the kinds of themes we're, looking for. So that felt deflating because I did feel like I had some connections with some of them and I could tell they did appreciate it and liked it. And I knew I had something good. Um, but it was just like one more door closing every time. And so that is when I pivoted and connected with this consultant team out of Colorado, and decided to start working with them. And in that process of them really teaching me how to self-publish is how I ended up creating Rodney K. Press, the publishing company. That wasn't initially what my intention was. I was just like, this is the first book of, going to be many, what I was feeling at the time. But, um, they it came to the point where like, okay, I'm going to have a publishing company to put out my books. What am I going to call it? And my two biggest writing influences are my maternal grandfather Rodney and my mom Luann Kay. And so I put the names together, and things just started like clicking and feeling super aligned. Like the only way I can describe it is for the first time in my career life, like the alignment was really starting to come in. I had flickers of that, like I said, with tapping into kids with their memoirs, just having conversations with them. But like the classroom stuff wasn't always like, oh, I'm supposed to be in front of a classroom, or, that wasn't always there. It was
Mhm.
more of relational things and the stories that happened when I was teaching.
So, what do you mean by your grandpa Rodney and your mom influential, were the influential
Yeah.
people regarding your writing? How so? Were they writers, or they just
Grand
did a good job being your
yeah.
cheerleaders, or?
Oh, great, great writers. So grandpa used to write us girls letters. I have two sisters, and he used to write us letters, and they were really witty, always self-deprecating. He had lost his leg. He was a diabetic and had lost his leg years, maybe before I was even born. But he would, draw a little illustration of him with his peg leg as he'd write it on there, and write like funny poems and things. Um, and his handwriting was in this capitalized, like beautiful print that was always so cool to me. And so I'd save his letters. And when it came time to design the logo for the company, I worked with this amazing um, graphic designer out of Grand Rapids, my hometown. Uh, and her name's Mary, and she took his handwriting and made it into a logo. And I'm still obsessed with it. It's like the best, the best decision I
Wow,
made. Right? Yeah. Um,
that's
and then
awesome.
my mom, always a really good writer. She had some things printed in like um, the paper before. She had written poetry and um, different things. And then when I was going through high school and I had papers to write, she would always sit next to me and kind of we'd bounce ideas after each other. She'd show me how to reword things, um, and how to use, you know, figurative language and how to make just things sound more cohesive. And so, yeah, she was very influential in helping me to improve my writing. And then she's just always been a great writer herself. So I felt like not only was it very much in my genes, but these are two people that, uh, yeah, I wanted to honor when I created
Yeah,
the company.
that's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, it makes it all the more meaningful, right? When you can tie it all in. Yeah. The little things that are big things, and you don't always know how they're going to play out down the road, right? Like those little letters are so simple. You know, my mom used to write little post-it notes in our lunch boxes. And it's like you just don't always realize how something so simple and basic could foster something bigger down the road. So I'm sure he didn't think that much of those letters, but they were monumental for you.
And he
Yeah.
passed when I was only 10. So I still having those letters, it's so cool to look back on his sense of humor and just our relationship because we would just kind of like tease each other. Um, yeah, and I'm so grateful I still have those. And so that was in 2016. I got the company together, released my first book under the Rodney K. Press umbrella, and then I started having people coming to me saying, "Hey, I've always wanted to write a book. Could you help me? Like, can I hire you?" And I was like, "Oh, well, that I honestly hadn't even really thought of that before," which is funny considering, okay, I've always taught and now I have a publishing company. And like, why not combine the two skill sets, right?
Right.
Um, but it really came from other people. And so my first author was a friend of a friend who's local, and we worked on her children's book and then her next one. And then I had more people coming to me, and um, yeah, and then I was doing that alongside of teaching for from 2016 until 2020, and then 2020 hit, and everybody's lives got thrown upside down, and that's when things really started to shift. So, like most everybody who's listening, everybody can think of how the spring of 2020 affected their life and the different moving parts and how a lot of people started shifting what they wanted to do. It started what we now know as the Great Resignation, where a lot of people left their careers to start something different. We all got more time at home. We had time to slow down. And we really started to reprioritize what we wanted to do. So, up until I had my own children, my students were like my kiddos. So I always said, I have my children and then I have my kiddos. My students were my kiddos. But, as my kids got older, as much as I love my students, like obviously I was feeling far more pulled to home and I was getting busier and they were getting in activities, and um, there was less of a focus on the classroom. And I felt that. And so that was part of it. The other part of it was being working from home in the spring of 2020 and teaching students online. I loved being able to design my own schedule. I love being able to have a slow morning with my kids, to not be racing out the door. I mean, I would be out the door sometimes before my kids would even wake up. I was missing mornings with them. I hated that. And once I got
Hmm.
that back, I was like, I can't let this go. Um,
Hmm.
and then, of course, it was knowing that I had this publishing company and was able to bring these books forwards. And it was the one creative outlet I really had. Teaching, you have, so much creativity, only so much, but really things are kind of designated for you. So I loved that publishing allowed me to be creative and to collaborate on ideas. And so it was this mixed bag of like, well, everything is leading for me to shift now, and now's the time to do it. And then I was also in Vanessa's Activate course, and that is really what helped thrust everything forward. So in that course, she allows people to really get into their purpose and what we're here to do, what is in alignment for us. And um, it all just became so clear. It was like the tipping point of so many moving parts that came together. And so in 2020, I left the teaching career. I haven't renewed my license. Left that chapter behind. It was a beautiful chapter, but I since have stepped away and started publishing full time. And I always tell people that, energy goes where energy flows. And it was like when I was teaching and publishing on the side, publishing was always going to be a side business because I'd meet somebody new and they'd say, "What do you do?" And I'd say, "Oh, I'm a teacher. I also publish." But, teacher was my identity. And so once I stepped into publishing full time, just energetically, people just started coming out of the woodwork. Like I wasn't marketing, I wasn't doing a whole lot. I mean, a little bit on social media, but like no paid advertisements, no anything. And they just started organically coming to me. And I think it has so much more to do with energy and alignment and what I now declare to the universe. Here's what I'm doing. And the universe is like, oh, she's publishing now. Okay, let me rearrange things and we'll send projects her way. So I think that's such an important thing for people to uh, understand is that, it does require, yes, a leap of faith, but until you take that, it's always going to be this side hustle, or it's going to be something you do when you have time as opposed to your full-time gig, if that's what you want it to be.
Hmm. Yeah, being able to open up the space to allow it to come in and manifest in a different way, right? And stepping outside of the system where we've been really focused on, but this is what I have to do, and this provides a full-time income and the benefits and the PTO and the right. You get it's so easy to get sucked into and become very reliant on that safety and that um, kind of web to fall into. And until you, like you said, take the leap of faith, which 2020 beautifully provided for a lot of people, because I don't know that many would have done it otherwise, right? Because we didn't have to. We didn't have to think about it. We didn't have to rearrange. We didn't have to, yeah, see it differently.
Yeah, and I'm well aware that I'm in a marriage, and so my husband was the breadwinner. I am having a very low teaching salary. I was just in the process of getting my master's, and so I was still under that master's level, and I was also working in the lowest paying district, like in the metro area. So it's not like my salary was, we were depending on it. So I was very fortunate in that way. And at the same time, I will say I have witnessed so many other people who didn't have the safety net that I have take a chance into what is really aligned for them. And I really have seen and believe that when you do what's in most alignment for you, that things fall into place. And so Yeah, I think that it's always worth the risk for sure.
And the flip side is the system's always there too. And not that everyone needs to be an entrepreneur because it's not for everyone, and of course that's fine. But if it calls to you and that is the grind that you want to do, I always felt after a while, and I still have to remind myself, I'll just go back in. I'll just pick up more shifts. I can go back and bartend, waitress. I can go back to the system if I need to. It's always there, but why
Right.
not? Why not give it a go? Because I already know what it looks like inside of there.
Right.
And yeah. So let's get a taste of it outside, and that freedom versus safety. It's the freedom tastes so
Yeah.
good.
Freedom versus safety. That's
Yeah.
like the whole paradigm, right? The flip flop.
Yeah, it is the internal struggle of being human, I think, in many
Yes.
regards, especially in today's world, for sure. So, you started with children's books because I've worked with you as a memoir writer. So, what does this look like as you're stepping into 2020? You're pretty much still doing children's books, or where are you shifting gears, or how's this looking?
No, really, it was just what was coming my way that I was interested in. So the first was children's book, and then a friend from Grand Rapids who's like wildly talented. He's a photographer, a videographer. Um, he was making a book of all of the like over 70 some hockey arenas within Minnesota. And if you are in Minnesota and part of the hockey community, especially if you're a hockey player, which I was, if you've played in some of these rinks, you just know how iconic they are and how you know the smell, you know what they're like. And um, I was so excited that he came to me to say, "Hey, would you want to work to bring this with me to bring this forward?" So that's a photography book. That was in the first few years. I also had um, my cousin wanted to write a memoir about really the real of motherhood, the things they don't tell you about, like what happens to your, like all the funny stuff that happens to your body, all the whatever, a lot of the unspoken things that you get together with your girlfriends and you're like, why didn't anybody tell me this? Or why wasn't this in any of the manuals? That was a fantastic project to work on. And she's hilarious. And that's a great book as well. And so, really, they were just books coming my way that I was interested in. And I wasn't, the only genre I've never really been interested in taking on is like fantasy or sci-fi, just because that's not what I would read. And I don't take on any projects that I'm not excited about and excited about working with and feel I can bring a lot of value to. Those are just not really in my wheelhouse. And so I've never really considered working with those. I've had some come my way and I'm just like, yeah, no, I'm sorry, that's not for me. So, um, but I've always
Are
been.
there certain themes that you prefer? Like themes of mental health or motherhood or medical mishaps or stuff like that, that you trauma.
Yeah, great question. I mean, for anyone who's familiar with my podcast, I feel like what I do tend to highlight are people who have overcome adversity. And it's like, I want to be educated as to how, I want to be inspired by their story. I love uh, just learning about people in different fields. And so there's a few projects that are getting fleshed out right now, and I think they're going to move forward, that I'm very excited about, that have to do with specific fields of study I'm interested in. It has to do with unveiling the truth. It has to do with kind of pulling back the curtain on things that I agree need to be exposed. Um, I love that. I really, anything that moves me, inspires me, educates me, it needs to feel good in my soul. Like I've come across some very interesting writing and some submissions, and I felt like I just this doesn't, this just doesn't feel as good. I don't know how else to explain it. And so I'm very much
Mhm.
led by my plexus, my intuition. And so everybody intuitive that I've connected with, they all say I feel things in my gut very strongly. And so I just really operate in that way, and hasn't led me astray. There's never a project I've said no to that I've regretted later. There's never one that I took on that I'm like, oh, I shouldn't have taken that on. So yeah, really
If it's not
what
a
what feels good.
if it's not a hell yes, it's a hell no, right? Just
Absolutely.
sometimes it's as
Yes.
simple as that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yep. That's
yeah.
exactly it.
And just moving forward, which I feel like you do a really great job at, is just moving forward, whatever it is, whatever is next. Where I feel like I tend to be more hung up, or I'm staring at it thinking, how do we modify it? How do we do it different? Where yeah, you just move in whatever ways you need to, and you recalibrate nicely.
Well, thanks. I think, as I'm learning more about my human design and my birth chart and everything that I am uh, really designed, the ways I'm designed to operate in the world, it's really with being in the flow and just trusting my gut and my intuition. That is how I make decisions. And when I make decisions that way, instead of like being over analytical, uh, the end result is far better. And luckily, I'm not a very pragmatic, analytical person in that way. So I'm much more led by intuition. Um, I'm an ENFP. My human design is a generator. So those very much are about being in the flow and being led by feeling and perceiving. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and then, having Meredith and on the podcast, and then I did another reading with her and just learning my birth chart. So uh, Jupiter was a very prominent on in my birth chart, as was um, the messenger. Why can't I think of it?
Mercury.
Mercury. Thank you. Yes, and it's all about the balance between both big picture storytelling and the details as well. So I really have
Mm.
those. Those have been prominent in my birth chart. So when I'm starting to understand just more about myself, all of this just makes sense as
Yeah.
to why I'm doing what I'm doing.
It's validating, right? Like, oh my gosh, it's not, that's just me.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's just me. It's just how
yeah.
my soul is expressing in this
Yeah.
world, and it's changing and it's evolving because again, I never thought about creating a publishing company, even though I loved writing. I never ever thought about creating a podcast. Um, but I just would have these little nudges of like, okay, I'm going to follow this and see where this goes. And every time I've done it, it's like, well, of course. Like, I love listening to people's stories. Like, why wouldn't I want to just hang out with someone for an hour, 2 hours, sometimes at a time, and just listen to them tell their story? We were just got back from a girls' trip yesterday, and you know, all my friends are super organized, so they had all chosen their seats ahead of time for the flight back, while I didn't, and so they're all kind of together and behind me, and I am in a row ahead, sandwiched in between this couple. And when I sat down, I said to the woman, do you want me to switch with you so you can be next to him? She's like, oh, I've got a hip thing. No, I need to be by the aisle if that's okay. I'm like, no problem. Anyways, we talked for the 2.5 hour flight the whole time. And that's just, that's me. Like, that's what I like to do whenever I go places and meet new people. And everybody's freaking fascinating. I mean, we talked about so many things, like world stuff that's going on. We talked about travel and like um, our own, like, I don't know, our own design and makeup. Like, it's so, yeah, all of it is just super affirming to see that I am just, the more I am myself and comfortable being with myself, the more my career is. is really following that.
I think I had jotted down some notes, and just how Philip Yancey says faith is trusting in advance what will only make sense in reverse. And you can
Yes.
call it faith, you can call it life, you can call it whatever you want, right? But when you look back, it's the web and how it was weaved makes so much more sense. And you saying, the connection from high school to then going into teaching to writing and allowing others to share their stories or their ideas to podcasting, right? This web of connection and how this is innately a part of you and being able to see it, through a natal chart or human design or whatever it is. I think the natal chart does a beautiful job of reflecting back to us, oh my gosh, that's what I meant to do. I remember being in Vanessa, it wasn't Activate actually. She used to host workshops up at her Minneapolis office. And I remember going to one, and it was like a heart opener workshop. And one of the questions was, what did you want to be when you were younger? And I said, oh, without a doubt, I wanted to be a teacher. But because I didn't go to school to be a teacher, I just assumed that meant nothing. Well, now I'm, teaching mediumship, or it's just so funny how we know when we're younger, or the things that are highlighted or maybe marked as a nuisance. Like my parents always being told that I talk too much at conferences. Oh, Amanda, you sure do talk a lot. Yeah,
I would get talked too much on the report card, and then it's like, how ironic is that? Really not ironic, because it was just my soul at that young age doing, I'm meant to
yeah,
talk for, like, whether
yeah,
I'm paid to do it for a career or doing it for free, like I would still be doing this. I do it in social
right.
settings, I do it behind the desk. And so, yeah, those things that it, that are picked up on when we're little, like that is what our soul's like, you're here to do this.
It's
And
gold.
yeah, a teacher might say
Yeah,
it's a bad thing on the report card, but if I were a parent, I would look at that and be like, oh, they're going to do something where they're heavy on communication, and that's amazing.
journalism, or yeah, right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's too bad that we get sidelined um, from those innate abilities, because the natal chart, I for my daughter's 19 now, but for her 16th birthday I had a reading done for her and recorded it. So I'm like, it might not
Wow.
mean a lot to you now, but for you to be able to go back to this and maybe better understand yourself throughout different periods of life, hopefully you find it helpful so that you can just own in on your own knacks and then kind of navigate
Yep.
from there as to what your natural strong suits are, right? Or just be
Right. And
validated.
not, yeah, not be so clunky trying to figure out life like our generation,
Yeah,
because we're so disconnected
yeah,
from those things that we have at our disposal, just like knowing your birth chart and knowing what you're naturally good at.
yeah. Agreed.
Hmm.
Yeah. I think it's great, and something that again has been weaved, as you're telling your story, being able to weave the connection piece together has been cool to see, and will be even more fun to see where you go from here. So, yeah, and how, okay, so you do memoirs, multiple different genres of books. I see that you just recently released a new online course. Can you talk more to that, or why do an online course?
Yeah, well, it came about from a number of reasons. I love my one-on work with clients. I mean, my favorite part of working with a client one-on-one to bring their book forward is those one-on-one meetings that we have, no question. And because I I personally work one-on-one with every Rodney K. Press author, there's only so many I can serve at a time. So I my highest was I was working on 15 different projects at a time. And I've done that a few different times, and that is a lot. It's a lot. It's a lot of not just the time it takes to do meetings and the things in between, but just I get invested in all of these projects, and they're I'll be laying in bed at night and I'll think of an idea to share with an author or whatever. So it takes up a lot of like mental space, you know?
Headspace. Yes.
Um,
Yeah.
and and so I know that there's only so many people I can serve, and yet there's so many ideas out there. And I I want to help as many people as I can because I was that author looking for a pathway years ago. And I know how daunting it is to go online and to see all of these different opinions. And you should do this. No, don't do that. And they contradict one another so often. And so I really just want to share with people like, listen, I've been exactly where you are. I know the different paths. I can tell you all about this way or that way, and I want you to make the decision that's best for yourself. But here's why I think you can do it, and here's how I can help. And so, one reason is to serve more people for sure. Another reason is it's an investment to work with a publisher like myself for 6 months. And so some people have budgetary restraints. And I would hate for anybody to be stopped at not bringing a book forward because it just wasn't in the cards for them to, it wasn't in their budget. And so I wanted to bring forward something that was, I think, feasible for anybody, honestly, because once you make an investment in yourself, what comes back is always tenfold. There's no question in that for me. And, you know, beyond the, um, beyond the budgetary restraints, some people want to do this more on their own. Some people are like, they'll come to me and they say, okay, I have um, really, I have my book fleshed out. It doesn't need editing. I don't need the storyboard help. You know, I would argue that it would need a second eye if it hasn't already, but I digress. But they're really looking for just bits and pieces. And so, um,
Mhm.
what I wanted to do was offer a comprehensive course, a do it yourself, where they would get the information of what you need to know to bring a book forward. And there might be certain pieces that is far more what they need than others, but I would be willing to bet that if they think they have, this part in spades, they're going to look at this course and go, "Oh, I hadn't considered that." You know, like that's a good point. I
Mhm.
didn't even know that was something I should be looking into. Um, for
Mhm.
instance, some authors never consider, well, when I say, "Who's your target market?" They're like, "Well, kids." I'm like, "Okay, well, what age levels, what grades do you think, if you did a school visit, what grades would it be read in, and do you know what reading level those grades are reading at, and do you know how to write a book for that reading level?" There's so many different things that authors really don't think about before they're starting. I mean, I hadn't when before I got into all of it. I knew my book was a simple
Mhm.
rhyme scheme, and so that was less of an issue. But if you're writing to like a middle grade, it has to be very specific as to how you're writing the text. And so I wanted to bring forward something where they could do it on their own. So I've had some discovery calls where people are like, okay, my schedule doesn't is not very conducive to meeting every other week, and it changes so frequently, and is there any kind of like DIY, do it yourself? So those kinds of requests came directly from discovery calls. And I, was hesitant to do that for a while because I thought, well, that is a big bear to take on, everything that I do really within and teach within 6 months, and try to condense it into a course and offer it at a budget friendly option. The differences with my one-on-one clients, I'm really walking them through hand in hand through the whole process. No question, there is additional context or anecdotal stories, or here's what's worked before, things that you're going to get when you're spending more time with me. Um, but the blueprint in how to bring a book forward is going to be just as it is in the online course. And then, of course, with my one-on-one clients, I'm working directly with their book. I am giving them content editing feedback. We're working on illustration. All of those things that I have the gift of being able to do when I'm working one on one with them, and we have the time to do so. The online course is really devoted for people who are like, I just need a roadmap, and I like, then I
Let
can
me
do it.
go.
And yeah, and I'm going to have some questions, and I can, they can ask some questions in our live workshops, but it is way more for the do it yourself aspiring author.
Nice. Okay. I remember, so, I think we've talked about this before. When we're the teacher, we're equally the student. Even when we're in the role of teaching or providing, we're always learning from the person in front of me. And
Yes.
over the last few months, you have said that when I start repeating things consistently, then I know that it's time to build something more because I'm having the same repetitive conversations, right? With over the kind of the same context, which this beautifully will provide is all those kind of basics of, um, the reoccurring conversations that you're having. So say that I'm pretty good with everything, but I would like a little bit of feedback on my specific project. Is that an option? Can I hire you for an hour or two after I complete the course, or if I'm in the middle of it and I'd like some one-to-one time? Is that an option?
So there is an option to connect with me to become a one-on-one client after completing the course, and it would basically be my one-on-one client fees minus the fees of the course. So um, it, for sure, because I think even with getting all of the information, I think I'm going to have a number of people who are going to say, okay, I still want that feedback. And I guess I do need a little bit more hand holding. But it provides a great framework for people to start with. And then if they want that, they absolutely can. And the other thing is, having this online course now is great because I can also I can give that now to my one-on-one clients. They're already invested in 6 months with me. I can give them, here's the framework. We're going to walk through it together. But now I have this tool to provide for them where
Mhm.
they have questions or they want to refer back to things in between meetings. They have that as well.
That's awesome. And is this a one-time investment? So if I want to write multiple books, do I have this course
Yes.
to refer back to repetitively?
Yeah, it's what is called evergreen, meaning once they purchase it, it is theirs going forward. So, what
Okay.
when I first started, I had an author that when I was still teaching at the time, she was ru- she had so many ideas for books. She had left her teaching job and was just focusing on writing. And so we did the first book together, we did the second book, and then she was coming up with more things. And I didn't have the time to devote to her while I was teaching. And so we came to a mutual agreement where I was like, listen, I think I've taught you what you need to know. I think you can go move
Sure.
forward and self publish. And there was a part of me that felt a little bit like, uh, insecure, I think maybe, that like, oh, now she's going to do this on her own. But the reality is she got to be there because I think I did a really great job of teaching her how to do it and to repeat the process. And so uh,
Sure.
once you kind of get out of your ego and realize like, oh, this is actually, this is I did exactly what I wanted to do, is I wanted to show her how to bring a book forward, and I did that. And so I think the more you just get comfortable and you're aware of what the process is, then you can start shifting things so that it works best for everybody involved.
And there's such an empowerment key to learn a different industry, to learn how to do it yourself, right? So you're providing that aspect as well. What is different about Rodney K. Press versus other publishing companies? Do you take royalties? What sets you apart from how a lot of other publishing companies operate?
Yeah, great question. I do not take royalties, first and foremost. If you look at the amount of money that's given to traditional publishing companies, it is like highway robbery to me. So they take like 75% of royalties from a book. And granted, they do distribution and they do circulation. But what most people don't know is that even with a big box publishing company, they're only going to market your book on average for about 30 days. After that, it's really up to the author to do the footwork. So the author is the one out there busting their ass, moving the book from place to place, getting into schools, going and doing book signings. And they're just sitting back and collecting checks on a lot of that footwork. Some
Mhm.
really big names, they're going to have their own publicist, they're going to have their own manager to help move things around. But for the average person, it seemed like a lot of work was just of that the author was doing was just the that was being given, the financial gain was being given away unfairly. So um, and so I was very clear that I did not want to take royalties from the beginning. um, I think another big difference is traditional publishing companies will they can change the story, the plot. They can have all of the creative decision making as to what goes on the cover. um, and as a creator myself, that feels like you're giving away so much of your baby. Like, I just, sure, some of the ideas are going to make it better, no question. But some of them are it's just really going to change it. What most people don't know is Twilight was written with adult characters, um, which is probably why there's a lot of sexual in nature undertones and really things going on. But they saw the dollar signs being marketed to teens and young adults, and so they changed it. And now it's become what it is. And so a lot of people would argue, well, that was a great call because look at how huge it got. Sure, but I just want
Sure.
to use that as an example of, they can really change things. Um, and it might shift from the intention that it initially had. So
Yeah, the authenticity and I think of how many chapters in my book that were channeled. I mean, they came through me. There were so many times that someone would read them back, or I would look back on it and say, did I write that? For someone else to come in and say, I think we could change this. No, we can do it different. I mean, could it possibly have sold more? Yes, but the authenticity piece of, yeah, it's kind of a two sides to the coin because, again, having someone else look at it is really beneficial. I'm totally someone who would probably need to work with you one to one just to provide that feedback and have another, set of ears and eyes, looking and hearing it, and um, kind of being able to set the tone and find, which path works best. But the flip side of
mhm.
that can be, well, they get to decide. Yeah, they get the ultimate say. And I love that again, that empowerment piece for the author to be able to decide what they want done with their book, which I think you beautifully provide.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, even I have to laugh because I have a client, one-on-one client for children's book right now, and he is not a fan of the Oxford comma, where I very much am. And the reality is, both are grammatical.
What is the Oxford comma?
So when you have a list of things like, um, Lindsay is a teacher, comma, an author, comma, and a publisher. That comma before and a publisher is the Oxford comma. It's in the list, and it is technically not required, although most like AI grammatical editing tools will always add it in. um, and so I think that's part of why I'm a huge fan of it, but that's just how I was taught to as a kid. Anyways, he does not like the Oxford comma. And so I was like, listen, it's
I'm
doable.
with him.
Yeah, it's not grammatically
Oh,
incorrect not to use it. So yeah, if that's like would irk you to have that, I don't care. Um, it's fine. things like that, like you're not going to get that at a big box. They're going to, this is how things are done, and this is, and that's such a small thing, but it's just funny because it just happened the other day. um and I
Sure.
just, being an author myself, I know that these projects are your babies. Like, you've invested so much
Hmm.
time and heart and soul into it, and so I want to honor it for the author as best as possible. So that's a difference in, the biggest differences in traditional versus myself. And then there are what people call vanity publishers, and I like to call these, they're like the assembly line of publishing companies, where if you reach out to them, they might reach out to you. If you, even if you've self-published on Amazon, they might reach out to you and say, hey, we saw your book, we're going to charge you this much to edit it, do some other things, and then it's going to be published by us. um, I like to think of these as kind of the sharks and the assembly line, because um, they they try to jump on a book that's doing well. So they've contacted my authors before, once it's been like a number one new release or a bestseller, and they're not interested in what the story is about or who the author is.
Hmm.
They're looking to get,
Dollar signs.
yeah. Um, so I would definitely encourage people to run away from those. The biggest thing I use my discovery calls for is, I want to get to know the author. I want to know what their intention is bringing forward a book. And I want to know if that aligns with my values. And when I say values, I don't mean like, are we the same political affiliation, which mine is kind of all over the board, anyways. It's more like, is this heart centered? Is this intended to educate, inspire, make people laugh, feel good? Like, if not, then that's not my bag, and best of luck. So I think that is
Hmm.
another difference. Is I walked away from a career that I really did love for so many reasons. And I knew teaching was in service to people. It's such a service oriented career. And so when I stepped into publishing full time, I was very clear that I want to only bring forward books that align with my values, that I feel like are a betterment to society in some way, even if it's just making people laugh, even if it's just nostalgia, even if, um, but it
Yeah, it's medicine. Yeah. The tears and the laughter are equally medicine, right? In their
yes,
own way.
yes,
Hmm.
yeah. And so I'm very intentional about the books with which I work, and I think that's another difference from a lot of other ones.
Awesome. Yeah. I very much can attest to quality over quantity. So, we're very much a numbers driven society, whether it's our bank account, the number on the scale, all the things. And I'm sure there's a part of you that, thinks, oh my gosh, I got 15 projects at once and I've waited a long time for this and this feels so good. And yet I don't, I go back to the restaurant bar industry. There's so many times where we've had a packed house and it's like you can see dollar signs in so many ways. And the night ends and you say, ooh, we did not give good service. That was a disaster. Versus, an even flow, kind of maybe slower night where we were able to converse with the tables, give really good service. We were on top of their drinks. Their food came out in a timely manner, that type of thing, where, quality in a fast paced world is kind of something
Mhm.
that we don't see as much of anymore. It kind of feels like it's fading. So I do think that quality over quantity you very much speak to. And I think you providing this course is going to add so much benefit, not only to you, but especially to, yeah, any clients who purchase it.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and you know, it's not just, am I spreading myself too thin amongst like my authors, but what am I giving to my family? Am I having to be, if I have
Mm-hmm.
15 projects on at a time, I can guarantee you I'm on my computer most every night of the week. And so,
Sure.
as great as that as is to have so many projects going on, I have to have a balance. I got into this largely because I wanted more flexibility with the family and more time, like in my mornings, and I don't want to feel spread too thin. And you never want to start working so much that you start to resent it. I got into this
Hmm.
I have such a passion for what I'm doing. And so you have to keep it in check. Otherwise, it would get to be something that I would throw my hands up and say it's too much. So, yeah, I'm really
Hmm.
excited about the online course and what it is going to offer. Um, just differentiate the way in which I work with clients and hopefully can reach a wider demographic of people who really want to bring forward books. And I don't want anything to stand in their way to share their story, because everybody's got at least one good book in them. I really believe that. People are
Hmm.
fantastic storytellers naturally. And, I would like to help them get there.
I like it. And where are you hoping that the podcast will go? Do you have any? So we didn't really cover that. How come you
We
went into
did
the podcast? Was
it.
that?
Yeah, we didn't cover that. The first
Hmm.
time it came about was a reading I had with Natalie, and she was like, um, they're pointing to your throat and you're going to do more speaking. And I was like, oh God, like my hands are already getting clammy. Like I'm not a public speaker. What's happening? Um, and she's like, no, no, like, have you ever considered doing a podcast? And at that time, I had you know, one of my best friends and I had tossed around the idea of doing one. And she was like, yeah, this is one. It's really going to be yours. And it's going to be very aligned with everything you're already doing. But they want you to open up your throat chakra and start like, that's something that has been blocked for me for a long time, I guess. And so I have done many things to unlock it. Things with breath work. I've got my essential oils chakra 5 right here that I spray every day, especially before I hop into a recording. I took voice lessons before I started my podcast. I've always loved to sing, but I had never taken voice lessons. I had done choir and things like that. But I just wanted to really work on projection. Anybody who knows me knows I can be a quiet talker. And so I wanted to really work on opening that chakra up. And I think it's a little bit about just the projection of my voice, but also there's a lot of just sharing my truth and who I really am that I think I stifled for a long time. And she was like, "Yeah, no,
Hmm.
you're stepping into you're stepping out of that stiflehood. You're stepping out of that. You're removing uh, main character energy, as she calls it. Even though my podcasts are not about me; they're about my amazing guests that come on, with the exception of this one.
Well, I'm so glad that you finally decided to tell your story because how many episodes have you done in the last year and a half?
um, well, I gotta look now. I feel like it's maybe in the is it close to 40 or no?
That's
It's
what I
in the
was thinking.
40s, I think. Um, It is 42. So this will be for
Mm,
episode 43. And
wow.
um,
Awesome.
yeah, there's been, when I first started, I was like releasing them hot week after week, which was awesome. And I loved that. And it just proved to be too much with my current lifestyle, with everything else I have going on, whether it be family stuff or the projects I have or whatever. And so I've had a little more space in between, but it is one of one of my favorite things I do throughout the day is when I do a podcast recording, because literally I am everything else in the world is shut off. Like that's when you know you are in alignment. When I'm in a meeting with an author or when I am recording a podcast and I don't think about anything other than what we are doing, that's when you know that you're in the right spot. So it feels pretty good.
Yeah, you hit the gold. Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Agreed. Well, you're doing amazing things, and I'm excited for this online course to see where this takes you and just helping so many other people. I have had so many people reach out to me over the last couple years asking, how did you write your book? You know, your name was dropped. Do you have any suggestions? And I send them to you, and a lot of them have been children's books. I've already, sent this on to a couple of different people that
So,
have recently inquired and said, hey, she's got this great. I think it's so cool. People are not afraid to do their own work at all. Like I'm totally like, Lindsay, can you keep me accountable? And we have to show up, every other week.
yeah.
And what do I
Right.
need to have written? How many more chapters should I have done? I'm one of those people. But there are so many people that say, I'm fine. I just need to know how to do it. So
hundred
you're
percent.
providing
And
that.
I'm somebody who needs yeah, I need an accountability partner too. But yeah, this was really born from what I was just in connecting with people, is just knowing that people wanted another option, and then just knowing that, there, because I work directly with each author, there is a limit to how many people I can serve at one time. And there's so many people that want to write a book. I know there's so many great stories out there. So I hope this helps them. Yeah, I'm excited.
Awesome. Well, for thanks for this. This has come about in the oddest of ways. This whole episode, we have had so many hiccups, and yet it's perfect timing, right? As always, beautiful
Yeah.
divine timing. Yeah.
Yeah, and the way that this worked, literally, did you text me this morning and say we should do that? Was that this
Hmm.
morning?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Because we were having hiccups for the other recording that we're doing, which I cannot wait for, which is your chapter 2 kind of. Um and rather than like forcing like a square hole in a nope, square peg in a round hole. There we go. Um we were just like, no, there's something else that we can do here. And it's, yeah, another reminder to just be in the flow of the universe, not fight against it.
Yeah.
Resistance will
There
drive you.
there was so much internal tug of war for me since last Thursday, and of going back, trying to figure out how much can we edit, how much can we make work. Is it worth taking the time to edit everything out? Should we just re-record? The technical difficulties, the things were getting cut out. There's so many
Hmm.
different things, and just again trying to that forcing like, "Ooh, you need to release an episode, well maybe we could do this." And then finally this morning I was like, I'm just going to send this message and just see. There's so many times that I want to send you things or say things, and I'm just like, no, it's not mine
Do
to
it
say, or
anytime.
she'll figure it out.
Oh my God.
But again, it's a reminder
No,
that
first
we're
of
all
all,
in our own stuff, right? So it's like somebody else being
yeah,
able to say, to me, I just always assume like she's already thought about that. That's always my go-to, is like, she already knows. She knows all this stuff. If she wanted to do it, she'd be doing it. But it's also a reminder that we all get in our own mode, and sometimes someone else sharing an insight is like, what? Oh, yeah, I
yeah,
hadn't thought
and
about
don't
that.
assume I already know the stuff. By God, like I need like ideas all the time. And being the baby of the family, I'm very used to like being led. And so I love being able to lead others in my role. But I'm very comfortable with people like saying like, hey, have you thought about this or whatever? Like, give me all of it. I'm a sponge, give me all the ideas. And especially coming from
Sure.
you, not just because like I love and respect you and know you're intelligent, but like you get these ideas downloaded, like you get them channeled, and they're usually like very aligned. So don't stop yourself from those texts, because I'll be like, oh yeah, girl, that's
All right.
exactly what I need to do. Thank you.
Noted, noted. Awesome. Yeah, yes, and we'll have a role reversal here very shortly. So
Yes, we will. Looking forward to it.
awesome.
Thanks, hon.
Cool.